The whispers cut through the humid Kansas air like knives as Sarah Calloway stood on the auction block, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The year was 1876, and the livestock auction in Willow Creek had taken an unexpected turn when the auctioneer, with a cruel glint in his eye, had announced a special item for sale: a mail-order bride who'd been rejected upon arrival for being too generously proportioned. "What do I hear for this fine woman? Might need an extra large saddle, but she'll keep you warm in winter," the auctioneer called out, eliciting raucous laughter from the crowd of dusty cowboys and farmers. Sarah stood ramrod straight, fighting back tears as her trunk sat beside her, everything she owned in the world packed inside. She'd traveled all the way from Boston after exchanging letters for months with a rancher named Thomas Wilson. But when she'd stepped off the stagecoach yesterday, he'd taken one look at her fuller figure and declared he wouldn't be marrying her after all, leaving her stranded in a town where she knew no one. 50 cents, someone shouted from the back. "I'll give $1, but only if she can cook," called another, triggering more laughter. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had nowhere to go, no money to return east, and now she was being humiliated in front of the entire town. The auctioneer was selling her services as a housekeeper. Not as a bride, at least he had that much decency, but the implication hanging in the air was clear enough. $2, came a deep voice from the edge of the crowd. The laughter dimmed as people turned to see who had spoken. A tall man stepped forward, pushing his way through the throng. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Sarah could see a strong jaw covered in a neatly trimmed beard. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect, stopping at the front of the crowd and looking directly up at her. $2, he repeated. And this time, Sarah saw his eyes piercing blue and filled with something that looked remarkably like kindness. $2 from Mr. Logan Blackwood, the auctioneer announced, seeming surprised. "Do I hear 3? The crowd had gone quiet, shifting uncomfortably. Logan Blackwood was evidently someone of importance in Willow Creek. $5, Logan said after a moment of silence, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. $5 going once, going twice. The auctioneer seemed eager to conclude the uncomfortable spectacle. $10, Logan stated firmly before the auctioneer could finish. A murmur rippled through the crowd. $10 was a respectable week's wages for most men standing there. Sold to Mr. Blackwood for $10. The auctioneer banged his gavel with visible relief. Logan approached the auction block as Sarah carefully descended the steps, her legs unsteady. "Miss, I'm Logan Blackwood," he said quietly when he reached her. "I own the Double B Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." Sarah lifted her chin, summoning what dignity she could. "Sarah Calloway, Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate your purchase, but I want to be clear that I'm only agreeing to cooking and housekeeping duties." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Of course, Miss Calloway, I wouldn't expect anything else." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her face, taking in her auburn hair and green eyes. "And just so you know, you're just right for me for the position, I mean." Sarah wasn't sure if he was being sincere or mocking her like the others, but she had no choice but to follow as he picked up her trunk with ease and led her away from the auction block. "My wagon's over here," he said, nodding toward a well-maintained buckboard with 2 chestnut horses hitched to it. After placing her trunk in the back, he offered his hand to help her onto the seat. As they pulled away from town, Sarah stole glances at her new employer. Logan Blackwood was solidly built, with broad shoulders that strained against his cotton shirt. His hands were calloused but clean, and he handled the reins with practiced ease. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting in the prairie sun. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked when they were well clear of town. "Do what?" He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Buy me. Outbid everyone. Say what you said." Logan was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "My ma was a big woman, best person I ever knew, kindest heart, strongest spirit when I saw you up there being treated that way." He shook his head. It wasn't right. Sarah studied his profile, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. "And what you said about me being just right, I meant it," he said simply. "Too many folks judge by the wrong measures." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels the only sounds between them. The Kansas prairie stretched out on all sides, tall grasses swaying in the breeze under an impossibly blue sky. "The Double B is a good-sized operation," Logan said eventually. "I've got a few hands working for me, but they bunk in the bunkhouse. The main house has been without a woman's touch since my ma passed 3 years back." He glanced at her. "Your room will be upstairs. It's private with a door that locks from the inside." Sarah felt some of her tension ease at that assurance. "I'm a good cook, Mr. Blackwood, and I can clean and mend clothing. I had hoped to be a wife, but I can be a fine housekeeper." "Logan," he corrected. "Mr. Blackwood was my pa, and he's been gone 5 years now." As they crested a small rise, Sarah got her first view of the Double B Ranch. A 2-story farmhouse painted white with green shutters stood proudly amid several outbuildings. A large barn, freshly painted red, dominated one side of a well-maintained yard. A bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a chicken coop completed the scene. Beyond the immediate buildings, fenced pastures held cattle and horses. "It's lovely," Sarah said honestly. "It's home," Logan replied, a note of pride in his voice. He pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to help her down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. Sarah felt herself blush at the contact, then immediately chided herself for the reaction. This was her employer, nothing more. "Let me show you around before we bring in your things," Logan said, leading her toward the house. The interior was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. The parlor had solid, well-made furniture that had seen better days. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove that Sarah immediately coveted. "The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but I take my meals here," Logan explained. "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at sunset. I'm not particular about what's served, just that it's hot and there's plenty of it." Sarah nodded, already planning menus in her head as they continued the tour. Upstairs, he showed her to a pleasant bedroom with a window overlooking the prairie. "This was my sister's room before she married and moved to California," Logan explained. "The washroom's at the end of the hall. There's a pump in the kitchen for water, and the woodpile is kept stocked behind the house." Sarah entered the room, running her hand over the simple but pretty quilt on the bed. "It's perfect, thank you." Logan seemed pleased at her approval. "I'll fetch your trunk, and then I need to check on a new calf. One of the hands will ring the dinner bell in about an hour." Once alone, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, hardly believing the turn her life had taken in the span of a few hours. This morning, she'd been facing destitution and humiliation. Now she had a roof over her head, employment with what seemed to be a decent man, and the beginnings of a new life. It wasn't the life she'd journeyed west to find, not the husband and children she'd dreamed of, but perhaps it was a start. Sarah squared her shoulders and began unpacking her meager belongings. She had work to do, and she would prove her worth to Logan Blackwood and to herself. The following days fell into a routine that Sarah found both challenging and satisfying. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, learning that Logan took his coffee strong and black and preferred his eggs fried with the yolks still runny. After he rode out to work the ranch, she spent her days cleaning the long, neglected house, preparing meals, and tending to the kitchen garden that had gone somewhat wild in the absence of regular care. The ranch hands 3 permanent workers named Hank, Jesse, and Caleb, plus 2 seasonal hands treated her with a respect that she hadn't expected after her experience in town. She suspected that had something to do with Logan, though she never heard him say anything specific on the matter. A week into her employment, Sarah was kneading bread dough when Logan entered the kitchen, his shirt and trousers covered in dust. "Miss Calloway," he said, removing his hat, "I'm heading into town for supplies. Is there anything you need?" Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, considering. "Some more coffee would be welcome, and perhaps some cinnamon and nutmeg if the general store carries them. I'll see what I can find." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a spell." Sarah's first instinct was to decline. The thought of facing the people who had witnessed her humiliation made her stomach clench. But then she reconsidered. Sooner or later she would have to face the town again. "Yes, I think I would like that," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Give me a moment to change." 20 minutes later, wearing her second-best dress and a bonnet to shield her face from the sun, Sarah climbed onto the wagon seat beside Logan. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, pinching her cheeks for color and smoothing her hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "You look nice," Logan commented as he flicked the reins to start the horses moving. "Thank you," Sarah replied, feeling a flutter in her chest at the simple compliment. The ride to town was pleasant, with Logan pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Sarah found herself laughing at his dry humor and relaxing in his company in a way she hadn't expected. "Been meaning to ask," Logan said as they approached the outskirts of Willow Creek. "How'd you end up at that auction in the first place?" Sarah's smile faded. "I came west as a mail-order bride. Thomas Wilson and I corresponded for nearly 6 months. He seemed kind in his letters, said he was looking for a wife who valued family over beauty." She smoothed her skirt nervously. "When I arrived, he took one look at me and said I wasn't what he'd expected. Said I'd misrepresented myself." Logan's jaw tightened. "Wilson's a fool." "Perhaps," Sarah said softly, "but I had spent every penny I had on the journey west. I had nowhere to go, no way to get back east. The hotel owner was kind enough to let me stay one night, but then—" She shrugged. "The auctioneer suggested selling my services as a housekeeper was the quickest way to solve my predicament." "Wilson's not just a fool, he's a dishonorable one," Logan said, his voice hard. "A man's word should mean something." They fell silent as they entered town, Sarah acutely aware of the stares directed their way. Logan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "Ignore them," he said quietly as he helped her down. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." Inside the store, Sarah kept her head high as she selected the items she needed. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, was polite if not overly friendly. "Will that be all, Mr. Blackwood?" he asked as Logan added a few items of his own to the counter. "Yes, Mr. Foster." "Put it on my account." As they were leaving the store, a stocky man with a handlebar mustache blocked their path. "Blackwood," he said, his eyes sliding to Sarah. "I see you got yourself a bargain at the auction." Sarah felt her face heat with embarrassment, but Logan's expression remained impassive. "Miss Calloway is my housekeeper, Wilson," he said evenly, "and a fine one at that." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was Thomas Wilson, the man who had rejected her. "Is she now?" Wilson's gaze raked over Sarah in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, you always did have unusual tastes." Logan stepped slightly in front of Sarah, his posture subtly protective. "Unlike some, I value substance over appearance. Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Sarah out of the store with a gentle hand at the small of her back. Once outside, he helped her into the wagon without comment, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm sorry about that," she said as they drove away from town. "You have nothing to apologize for," Logan replied firmly. "Wilson's had it out for me since I outbid him on the Simmons property last year. Using you to get at me just proves what kind of man he is." Sarah glanced back at the diminishing outline of Willow Creek. "I thought facing the town would be harder," she admitted. "But with you there, it wasn't so bad." Logan's expression softened, and he gave her a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Sarah Calloway." It was the first time he had used her first name, and Sarah found she liked the sound of it on his lips. The next few weeks passed in a comfortable rhythm. Sarah gradually put her stamp on the house, rearranging furniture, hanging curtains she'd sewn from fabric Logan brought from town, and filling vases with wildflowers she gathered during her rare moments of leisure. Logan never commented directly on these changes, but she sometimes caught him looking around with approval. One evening in late June, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Logan had finished his customary after-dinner coffee on the porch, he surprised Sarah by lingering in the kitchen as she washed the dishes. "Would you mind some company?" he asked, picking up a dish towel. "Not at all," Sarah replied, trying to hide her surprise as he began drying the plates she'd washed. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the clinking of dishes and the chirping of crickets outside the open window. "My sister wrote," Logan said eventually. "She's expecting her second child in the fall." "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, handing him a freshly washed cup. "You must miss her." "I do." Logan carefully dried the cup before setting it on the shelf. "Lily was always the talker in the family. House has been too quiet since she left." "Is that why you wanted a housekeeper?" Sarah asked. Logan seemed to consider his answer carefully. "Partly. The practical reasons were real enough. I'm gone from dawn till dusk most days, and coming home to a cold, dark house and having to cook for myself after a long day of ranch work was wearing me down." He paused, focusing intently on drying a plate. "But yes, I reckon the quiet was getting to me too." Sarah nodded, understanding all too well the ache of loneliness. "I'm the youngest of 5 children. Our house in Boston was always bursting with noise and activity. When my parents died of influenza 3 years ago and my siblings scattered to their own lives, the silence was deafening." "Is that why you answered Wilson's advertisement?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I was working as a seamstress, living in a tiny room above the shop. I wanted a family of my own children." She trailed off, embarrassed by the admission. Logan was quiet for a moment. "You'll have that someday." "Perhaps," Sarah said, though she wasn't convinced. She wasn't considered a beauty even before she'd gained weight after her parents' deaths, finding comfort in food when everything else in her life had fallen apart. "What about you? Have you never thought of marriage?" Logan handed back the last dried plate. "I came close once. Her name was Margaret. We were engaged when I went to fight in the war. She married someone else before I came home." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. Logan shrugged, but Sarah could see the old hurt in his eyes. "It was a long time ago. I was a different person then. War changes a man." They stood in silence for a moment, the shared confidences creating a new intimacy between them. "Thank you for your help with the dishes," Sarah finally said. "My pleasure," Logan replied, hanging up the dish towel. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Logan. After he left, Sarah remained in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about the man who had rescued her from humiliation and given her a home. She was starting to care for him in a way that went beyond gratitude, and that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. July brought scorching heat that turned the prairie grass golden and kept Sarah constantly wiping perspiration from her brow as she worked in the kitchen. One particularly hot afternoon, as she was preparing to start supper, she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw Logan and Hank supporting a third man between them, half carrying him toward the house. Sarah rushed to open the door. "What happened?" "Caleb got thrown from a horse," Logan explained, his face grim. "Hit his head on a rock. We need to get him inside." "Bring him to the sofa," Sarah directed, already moving to clear space. "I'll fetch water and bandages." When she returned with supplies, Logan had removed Caleb's boots and was examining a nasty gash on the young ranch hand's temple. The wound was bleeding freely, and Caleb was only semi-conscious, moaning softly. "You know what to do?" Logan asked as Sarah knelt beside him. "My mother was a midwife. I helped her sometimes," Sarah replied, gently cleaning the wound. "Head wounds always bleed a lot, but this doesn't look too deep. The concern is whether he's injured inside his skull." Logan watched as Sarah efficiently cleaned and bandaged Caleb's head, her hands steady and sure. "We should send for the doctor," he said. "Yes, but he'll need to be watched carefully until then." Sarah checked Caleb's pulse, then lifted one eyelid to examine his pupil. "Hank, can you ride to town for Dr. Miller?" "Yes, madam," Hank replied, already heading for the door. "What can I do?" Logan asked. "Help me make him comfortable, then fetch some willow bark from the kitchen. I'll make a tea to help with the pain when he's more alert." For the next several hours, Sarah and Logan took turns sitting with Caleb, monitoring his breathing and keeping him still when he occasionally tried to rise. By the time Dr. Miller arrived, Caleb was more coherent, complaining of a headache but able to recognize those around him. After examining the injured man, the doctor confirmed Sarah's assessment. "A concussion, but I don't believe there's any permanent damage. He'll need rest for a few days." "No riding, no work. He can stay here until he's recovered," Logan said firmly. After Dr. Miller left, with Caleb now sleeping peacefully on the sofa under the influence of a sedative, Logan found Sarah in the kitchen preparing a simple supper for the rest of the hands. "You were impressive today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Most women would have panicked at the sight of all that blood." Sarah shrugged, continuing to slice bread. "As I said, I helped my mother. Besides, panic never solved anything. Still, thank you." Logan stepped further into the kitchen. "Your quick thinking may have saved Caleb from worse harm. I'm glad I could help." Sarah glanced up, surprised to find Logan looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said softly. "Just seeing you in a new light, I suppose." Before Sarah could respond, Hank appeared at the back door, breaking the moment. "Boss, that new stallion is acting up again. Jesse can't get him settled." Logan sighed. "Duty calls. I'll check on Caleb before I head out." As he left, Sarah found herself smiling. "A new light," he'd said. Perhaps he was beginning to see past her size to the woman beneath. The incident with Caleb seemed to mark a turning point in Sarah and Logan's relationship. He sought out her company more frequently, often joining her on the porch in the evenings after supper, where they would talk about everything from books they'd read to their hopes for the ranch's future. Sarah found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the sound of Logan's laugh and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. By mid-August, Sarah had transformed the double BTK's main house into a true home. The pantry was well stocked with preserves she'd put up from the garden's bounty. Curtains hung at every window, and even Logan's formerly Spartan bedroom now boasted a colorful quilt and a rag rug beside the bed. "Place hasn't looked this good since Ma was alive," Logan commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the prairie sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've enjoyed making it homey," Sarah replied. "It gives me satisfaction to see empty spaces become welcoming." Logan nodded, rocking slowly in the chair beside hers. "You've brought more than order to this house, Sarah. You've brought life back to it." The warmth in his voice made Sarah's heart beat faster. "I'm glad. I've come to love this place." "Just the place?" Logan asked, his voice suddenly serious. Sarah turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes intent on her face. "What do you mean?" Logan set his rocking chair still, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking a lot lately about you, about us." "Us?" Sarah whispered, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. "I hired you as my housekeeper," Logan said carefully, "and you've been the best I could have asked for, but somewhere along the way I started seeing you as something more." He took a deep breath. "I find myself watching for you first thing in the morning, looking forward to our talks in the evening, missing you when I'm out on the range." Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. "Logan, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this isn't what you came west for. You wanted a husband, a family. And I'm not sure I'm what you had in mind. I'm rough around the edges, set in my ways, but I care for you, Sarah, deeply." "I care for you too," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible over the chorus of evening insects. Logan reached across the space between their chairs, taking one of her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just want you to know where I stand, that if you might consider me as more than your employer someday, I'd be the happiest man in Kansas." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his tan and calloused from years of ranch work, hers softer but bearing the small nicks and burns that came from cooking and housework. "I never thought someone like you would look twice at someone like me." Logan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I'm not. I know I'm not what most men want," Sarah said, gesturing vaguely at her fuller figure. "That day at the auction made it clear enough." "Sarah, look at me," Logan said firmly, waiting until she raised her eyes to his. "Those fools at the auction, Wilson, they're blind men. When I look at you, I see a woman with courage enough to travel across the country alone, kindness enough to nurse a hurt ranch hand, skill enough to transform a bachelor's shack into a home. I see your smile when you're kneading bread, the light in your eyes when you talk about books you love, the gentle way you handle even the most ornery chickens." He squeezed her hand. "And yes, I see your body too, your soft curves, your beautiful hair, your eyes that change color with your mood. You're just right for me, Sarah Calloway. Just exactly right." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes at his words, words she'd never expected to hear from any man, let alone one as good and honorable as Logan Blackwood. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Logan smiled, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You don't have to say anything tonight, just think about it." They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky, hands still linked between their rocking chairs, the air between them charged with possibility. The next morning, Sarah woke early, her mind still spinning from Logan's declaration. She dressed with extra care, selecting a blue calico dress that she knew brought out the color in her eyes, and pinning her hair up in a style slightly more elaborate than her usual practical bun. She was just sliding biscuits into the oven when Logan entered the kitchen, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy. "Morning," Logan replied, his voice warm. You look pretty today." "Well, you always look pretty, but especially today." "Thank you," Sarah said, ducking her head to hide her pleased smile as she poured him coffee. They moved around each other in the kitchen with a new awareness, their hands occasionally brushing as they prepared breakfast together. By the time the ranch hands filed in for their morning meal, Sarah's cheeks were permanently flushed, and she caught Hank giving Logan a knowing look that the ranch owner pointedly ignored. After breakfast, Logan lingered as the others headed out to start the day's work. "I'm riding out to the north pasture today," he said. "Won't be back till supper." "I'll have something special waiting," Sarah promised. Logan hesitated, then stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I meant what I said last night, Sarah. Every word." "I know," she said softly. "I've been thinking about it, about us." And his eyes searched hers. "And I think I'd like to see where this might lead." The smile that broke across Logan's face was like sunrise after a long night. "That's all I'm asking for, a chance." On impulse, Sarah rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Be careful out there today." Logan's hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been. "Yes, madam," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I surely will." The day passed in a blur for Sarah, her mind constantly returning to Logan's words and the feel of his rough cheek against her lips. She threw herself into preparing a special supper, making his favorite beef stew and baking an apple pie with the last of the stored winter apples. She was just setting the pie to cool when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Going to the window, she saw Logan dismounting, earlier than she'd expected. He was moving with a purposeful stride that made her heart quicken. Sarah smoothed her hair and apron as she went to the door. Logan was already on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "You're back early," she said. "Couldn't concentrate worth a damn," he admitted. "Kept thinking about you." Sarah smiled. "I've been thinking about you too." Logan took a step closer. "I know we said we'd take it slow, see where things lead, but I've been riding around all day with one thought in my head." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I want to court you proper, Sarah, not as my housekeeper, but as a woman I admire and respect, a woman I'm coming to love." Sarah's breath caught at the word love. "Logan, you don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "It's too soon, I know that, but I wanted you to know where my heart is heading." Sarah reached out, taking his weathered hand in hers. "It's not too soon," she said softly. "I've been falling in love with you since that day at the auction when you looked at me like I was worth something." "You're worth everything," Logan said fiercely. They stood on the porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard, hands clasped and hearts open. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, Logan pulled Sarah into his arms. "May I kiss you?" he whispered, his lips inches from hers. "Please," Sarah breathed. His mouth met hers in a kiss that started soft and tentative but quickly deepened as Sarah's arms wound around his neck. Logan's hands splayed across her back, holding her close as if she were precious and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Logan confessed, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm glad you finally did," Sarah replied, smiling up at him. The sound of approaching horses made them step apart, though Logan kept an arm around Sarah's waist as Hank and Jesse rode into the yard. The two ranch hands exchanged knowing grins at the sight of their boss and the housekeeper standing so close together. "Don't you two have work to do?" Logan called, but there was no heat in his voice. "Yes, sir," Jesse replied, tipping his hat to Sarah with exaggerated courtesy as they rode toward the barn. Logan shook his head, chuckling. "Whole ranch will know about us by supper time." "Does that bother you?" Sarah asked. "Not one bit," Logan said firmly. "I'm proud to be courting you, Sarah Calloway." Let the whole territory know as far as I'm concerned." The next few weeks were the happiest of Sarah's life. By day, she continued her duties as housekeeper, but evenings were devoted to her courtship with Logan. They took long walks along the creek that ran through the ranch property, rode out to picnic on a hilltop with views all the way to the horizon, and spent hours on the porch talking about their pasts and their dreams for the future. The ranch hands took the change in their relationship with good-natured teasing that Logan endured with remarkable patience. Even in town, where they now went together regularly, the initial whispers and stares had given way to acceptance, if not universal approval. Only Thomas Wilson continued to make snide remarks when they encountered him, which Logan ignored with dignified silence while Sarah held her head high, secure in the knowledge that she had found a man who valued her for exactly who she was. As summer gave way to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and changing the prairie grasses to russet and gold, Logan began spending his evenings carving something he kept hidden whenever Sarah came near. "It's a surprise," was all he would say when she asked, his eyes twinkling with secret pleasure. On a crisp October evening, with the first hint of frost in the air, Logan asked Sarah to ride with him to his favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise overlooking a bend in the creek where cottonwood trees blazed yellow against the blue sky. "It's beautiful here," Sarah said as they spread a blanket on the ground. "I can see why you love it." "My pa proposed to my ma on this very spot," Logan said, helping her sit. "Said he wanted to give her the prettiest view on the ranch along with his heart." Sarah's pulse quickened at his words. "Is that so?" Logan nodded, suddenly looking nervous as he reached into his pocket. "I've been working on something for you," he said, pulling out a small wooden box. Sarah took it with trembling hands. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a carved wooden ring. The band was polished smooth, with an intricate design of intertwined vines and flowers flowing around it. "Logan, it's exquisite," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "I know it's not gold or diamonds," he said, watching her face anxiously. "I can get you a proper ring in town if you prefer." "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "This is perfect. You made it with your own hands." Logan took the ring from her, holding it between his fingers. "Sarah Calloway, when you stepped off that auction block and into my life, I had no idea how completely you would change it. You've brought warmth and light into my home and my heart." He took her left hand in his. "I'm asking you to be my wife, not my housekeeper, but my partner in everything. To build a life and a family together on this land that I love almost as much as I love you." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome to speak. "Is that a yes?" Logan asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Yes," Sarah managed. "Yes, Logan Blackwood, I will marry you." Logan slid the wooden ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. As they rode back to the ranch, Sarah's hand kept straying to the ring on her finger, marveling at the intricate carving and the love it represented. "When shall we marry?" Logan asked as they approached the house, now glowing with lamplight in the gathering dusk. "I don't want to wait long," Sarah admitted. "Before winter sets in, perhaps," Logan smiled. "How about the first Saturday in November? That gives us 3 weeks to prepare." "Perfect," Sarah agreed, already making mental lists of what needed to be done. The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Word of their engagement spread quickly, bringing congratulations from neighbors and townsfolk alike. To Sarah's surprise, even some of those who had laughed at her on the auction block now stopped her in the general store to wish her well. "People can change their minds when they see someone's true worth," Logan said when she mentioned this to him. "And anyone who spends 5 minutes with you can see what a remarkable woman you are." Lily, Logan's sister, sent a letter expressing her delight at the news and including a delicate lace handkerchief as a wedding gift. "Something borrowed," she wrote, "that I carried at my own wedding. I only wish I could be there to see my brother finally find happiness." The day before the wedding, as Sarah was putting the finishing touches on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored muslin with lace trim she'd salvaged from one of her mother's old gowns, she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Looking out the window, she was astonished to see Thomas Wilson driving up to the house. Logan, who had been mending a bridle on the porch, stood to meet him. His posture wary, Sarah hurried downstairs, reaching the porch just as Wilson climbed down from his wagon. "Blackwood," Wilson said, nodding curtly. "Miss Calloway." "What brings you out this way, Wilson?" Logan asked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. Wilson shifted uncomfortably, then straightened his shoulders. "I came to apologize," he said, the words sounding as if they'd been forced out of him, "to Miss Calloway, for how I treated her when she arrived in Willow Creek." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Why now?" Wilson's gaze dropped to the ground. "My sister arrived from St. Louis last week. She's built similar to you, Miss Calloway. Hearing how folks treated you when you first arrived, knowing my part in it." He shook his head. "It made me ashamed. No woman deserves that kind of humiliation, regardless of her appearance." "No, they don't," Logan agreed, his voice still cool. Wilson looked back up, meeting Sarah's eyes directly for the first time. "I'm sorry, Miss Calloway, truly. What I did was dishonorable, as Blackwood rightly called it. I hope you can forgive me someday." Sarah was silent for a long moment, studying the man who had caused her such pain and embarrassment. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you for your apology, Mr. Wilson. I accept it." Relief washed over Wilson's face. He nodded to Logan. "You're a lucky man, Blackwood." "Don't I know it?" Logan replied, his expression softening as he looked at Sarah. As Wilson drove away, Logan turned to Sarah. "That was mighty generous of you." Sarah shrugged. "Holding on to anger only poisons the one who carries it. Besides," she added with a small smile, "in a strange way I owe him a debt. If he hadn't rejected me, I might never have found you." Logan gathered her into his arms. "Then I owe him a debt too, though I'm still not inviting him to the wedding." Sarah laughed, resting her head against his chest. "Agreed." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with a sky so blue it made Sarah's heart ache with joy as she dressed in her cream-colored gown. Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, helped arrange her hair, weaving late-blooming prairie flowers into the auburn waves before securing Sarah's mother's lace veil. "You make a beautiful bride," Mrs. Peterson said, stepping back to admire her work. "And not just on the outside. You have a beautiful spirit, Sarah Calloway." "Thank you," Sarah replied, blinking back tears, "for everything." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Sarah walked alone down the aisle of the small church in Willow Creek, her eyes fixed on Logan standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit. The love shining in his face as he watched her approach made her feel more beautiful than she had ever felt in her life. Hank served as best man, while Mrs. Peterson stood as Sarah's matron of honor. The church was filled with neighbors, ranch hands, and townsfolk who had come to witness the union of Logan Blackwood and the woman once mocked at the town auction. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. When it came time for the rings, Logan surprised her by producing not only the wooden ring he had carved, now nestled in a small velvet box, but also a simple gold band. "I want you to have both," he whispered as he slid them onto her finger, the gold band first, followed by the wooden one. one to show the world, and one to remind you of my promise to cherish every part of you always." Sarah's voice trembled with emotion as she placed a matching gold band on Logan's finger, repeating her vows to love and honor him all the days of her life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride." Logan's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all they would share in the years to come, when they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Logan Blackwood. The applause was heartfelt and joyous. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, with Sarah whirling around the floor in Logan's strong arms, her cream-colored dress swishing around her ankles. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Logan murmured as they swayed to a slow tune, their bodies close. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Sarah replied, lifting her face for his kiss. Later that night, as Logan carried her across the threshold of their home, truly their home now, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The Double B Ranch had become the home of her heart, and Logan the love of her life. "Welcome home, wife," Logan said softly, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor, now decorated with fresh boughs of pine and late autumn flowers for their wedding night. "Home," Sarah echoed, looking up into the face of the man who had seen her worth when others had only seen her size. The sweetest word in the world. As winter settled over the prairie, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland, Sarah and Logan settled into married life with a joy that warmed their home despite the frigid temperatures outside. They worked side by side to prepare the ranch for the harsh season, putting up preserves, smoking meat, and ensuring the livestock had adequate shelter and feed. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other from Logan's small collection of books, sometimes simply talking about their days or their hopes for the future. And at night, they discovered the deep intimacy of marriage, Logan's touch teaching Sarah to love her body as he did not in spite of its fullness, but because of the woman who inhabited it. Christmas brought their first real celebration as husband and wife. They decorated the house with strands of popcorn and cranberries, pine boughs and candles. Logan surprised Sarah with a beautiful shawl he'd ordered all the way from Denver, while she presented him with a hand-knitted sweater she'd been working on in secret for weeks. "Best Christmas I've ever had," Logan declared as they sat before the fire that night, Sarah nestled against his side. "The first of many," Sarah promised, taking his hand and placing it over her stomach. "The three of us will have many happy Christmases to come." Logan went still. "3," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. Our baby should arrive next summer." With a whoop of joy, Logan swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. "A baby," he said in awe, his hand gentle on her still flat abdomen. "Our baby." "The first of many, I hope," Sarah said softly. "As many as you want," Logan promised, his eyes suspiciously bright in the firelight. "Oh, Sarah, when I think how close I came to not bidding that day at the auction." Sarah placed a finger over his lips. "But you did bid. You said I was just right for you." "The truest words I ever spoke," Logan said, gathering her close again. "You're everything I never knew I needed, Sarah Blackwood." As the new year of 1877 began, bringing with it the promise of new life and continued love, Sarah often thought back to that humiliating day on the auction block. What had seemed like the lowest point of her life had, in fact, been the beginning of her greatest happiness. Life on the frontier was never easy. There would be droughts and blizzards, hard times and moments of doubt. But Sarah knew that with Logan by her side, with the family they were building together, she could face whatever challenges came their way. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Logan thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her with that same expression he'd worn the day of the auction, as if she were precious beyond measure, as if she were exactly, perfectly right. Summer came to the Kansas prairie in a riot of wildflowers and the sweet scent of new grass. The Double B Ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Logan and Sarah, with cattle multiplying and crops growing strong in the fields. And as the land bloomed, so did Sarah, her body rounding with the child growing within her. On a sweltering July afternoon, with a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon, Sarah felt the first pangs of labor. Mrs. Peterson, who had become a dear friend in the month since the wedding, arrived to help, along with Dr. Miller. Logan paced outside the bedroom door for hours, his face growing increasingly worried as Sarah's labor progressed. Finally, as the storm broke over the ranch, bringing cooling rain and the sharp crack of thunder, a different sound pierced the air, the lusty cry of a newborn. "You have a daughter, Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Peterson announced, opening the door with a broad smile. "A beautiful, healthy daughter." Logan entered the bedroom in a daze, his eyes immediately finding Sarah propped up against the pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," Sarah said softly. Logan approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully on the edge and peering at the tiny face nestled against Sarah's breast. A shock of dark hair, still damp from birth, crowned the baby's head, and as Logan watched, she opened her eyes blue like his own. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to stroke his daughter's cheek. "We thought we'd name her Lily after your sister," Sarah said. "Lily Rose Blackwood." "Lily," Logan repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." Sarah smiled, leaning into his embrace as they gazed down at their daughter. "Not perfect," she corrected gently. "Just right." 5 years later, the Double B Ranch had nearly doubled in size, prosperity evident in the freshly painted buildings, the expanded herds, and the new addition to the main house that Logan had built the previous year. Sarah stood on the porch, watching as her husband helped 5-year-old Lily and 3-year-old James out of the wagon, their faces alight with excitement after their trip to town. "Mama," Lily called, racing toward her with a paper clutched in her hand. "Look what I got at school today." Sarah knelt to examine her daughter's first writing exercise, praising the wobbly letters with genuine pride. James, not to be outdone, presented a stick he'd found that was shaped just like a horse. "Mama, see." "I see, my darling," Sarah assured him, accepting the treasure with appropriate reverence. Logan approached more slowly, carrying their youngest 10-month-old Thomas, who was fast asleep against his father's broad shoulder. "How was town?" Sarah asked, rising to press a kiss to Logan's cheek. "Busy. Everyone's preparing for the harvest festival." He shifted Thomas to his other arm. "Mrs. Foster asked if you'd consider entering your apple pie in the contest this year." Sarah laughed. "After I won 3 years in a row, I think it's only fair to give someone else a chance." Logan's free arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. "Always thinking of others," he murmured. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." Sarah leaned into his embrace, watching as Lily showed James how to write his name in the dirt of the yard, her family, her home. Her life, so different from what she had imagined that day she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Willow Creek. "What are you thinking about?" Logan asked, noting her contemplative expression. "About how life takes unexpected turns," Sarah replied. "How what seems like disaster can lead to joy beyond imagining." Logan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Best $10 I ever spent," he said with a grin, Referring to the amount he'd paid for her at the auction, Sarah swatted his arm playfully. "You're impossible." "Impossibly lucky," Logan corrected, dropping a kiss on her lips. "To have found a woman who was just right for me in every way." As the sun began to set over the prairie they both loved, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah Blackwood looked at her husband and children and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. From humiliation on an auction block to this abundance of love and belonging, her journey had been unexpected, difficult at times, but ultimately more rewarding than she could have ever dreamed. "Just right," she whispered, echoing Logan's words from so long ago. "We're all just right for each other." And as Logan's arm tightened around her waist, as their children played in the yard of the home they had built together, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her here, to this moment, to this love.